So a lot of people have questions about how to bid wiring jobs, how we bid them, and kind of the process. And I'm starting outside for a reason, because the type of building makes a big difference. This is my building, and it's a single-story strip mall with UPS driving by right now. And so I'm going to start there, and we're going to come back to some of the why, but it comes down to, this is going to vary from location to location, but it comes down to building codes. And some of the building codes means there's going to be fire stops in the wall, and we're going to talk about that when we get inside, because it's something you're going to have to consider when you're doing the wiring, when you're doing the cabling. And now we're going to start walking through the building and kind of show you how we look at it, and then in the end I'm going to show you actually how these bids go into the system that we use and how we actually send them to the client, get approved, and get the job done and get paid. Now I'm doing this at my building because one, I have access to it. Two, a lot of times they can't take the camera in. Like for example, we bid these medical jobs or any of these other buildings, they're actively being used. We're adding drops to them. I can't just wander around their building with a camera showing you stuff. There comes a lot of legal issues. So showing you my building is easy because I have permission from me, the owner, to do this. All right, so let's go inside. First place to start is go to their back room, maybe a demarc, which demarcation is going to be where the phone lines come in, data lines come in, cable comes in. In our case, we don't even have any of that old stuff in our building. We ripped all of it out because it wasn't necessary. But a lot of the companies you're going to go into are still using either plain telephone lines or at least have a room that comes in, and it's often where the cable comes in. That is not always the same in a multi-tenant building as where their server room would be, but in some cases it is. So you got to determine where the wire's coming in, so where you're running them to. In this case, we have a cabinet and we have a patch panel. Now, not everyone does, so you either have to add a patch panel in, no big deal, just add the price in there, and we'll talk about pricing later in the video. You put the patch panel in, or see how many ports they have open on there. Something else to note is, was it even done properly? Ours is neat and clean because we put it in, but we have ports open, and I can look behind and you can see that there's slack on the wire. If someone who punched it down and had no idea what they're doing, this happens a lot, and you're going to see this. When they do that, you want to make sure you can service this patch panel. We've seen some that we've just declared it's easier to put another patch panel in because of the way all the wires were kind of rigged in there. We're like, look, we don't, unless they want to pay us for cleanup, we don't want to try and pull those back out because they just didn't leave us enough tension to get behind the patch panel. So we can just put either another one in, or you can go with a modular. So we have to make sure there's enough ports on the switch, enough ports on the patch panel, or we add switches and patch panels. So those are the first things to think about. Second thing to think about is how far away is this from where they want the wires. So I often like to start here so I know where all the wires are going to be landing, where all my poles are going to be landing. So all the poles come through the ceiling, come down here. And I look around to make sure there's no obstructions. This is a standard drop ceiling building, so there's not any obstructions. Let's talk about distance, because that's the next thing you're going to have to think about. Because once you've established, okay, this is where it is, and it's not always in the ideal place. I mean, ideally, you like it centrally located. That's just not how buildings are always laid out. Ours is at the back of the building because that was the easiest, best place to put it, where it's most out of the way, and all the servers can be back here, versus, you know, trying to put it central in the building to make all the runs shorter. We're going to talk about how an IDF and MDF kind of complement each other and why we have two of them here. So I'm about midway through my office, and so the server's back there. And to get you an idea when you're looking around, and I'm going to pan the camera around here, this is how you figure out the distance. The easiest way. I mean, it's great if you have one of those little wheels to measure it out. You can try to set tape measures on the floor. You can get the wheels for pretty cheap. That's got the little measure, so feet, if you really care about exactly how many feet it is. The most important part is, does it exceed the 300-foot rule of how far you can have 100 meter, 300 foot. I've gotten that wrong before in our videos, but that's roughly the distance that you can have for standard Cat 5, Cat 6 cabling before there's a drop off. And if you're using Cat 6A, you can get 10 gigabit over the full length, and you're using Cat 6 standard, it only goes for 37 meters before there's a drop off. That's a whole other video, but just a couple considerations there. Most of the time, the majority of offices here in 2018 are still just using gigabit because that's the standard equipment you're going to find on there. So pretty much all your jobs are going to be, well, we're moved mostly to Cat 6. There are some people who still at Cat 5. I've had a few people comment that the price difference isn't there anymore. It still is. It's still about $40 a box cheaper to get Cat 5. Not that stupid clad stuff. We're talking about actual copper. You do not want the aluminum clad stuff. Don't get that. You see those boxes for really cheap. Avoid that. You're avoiding a headache and potential fire hazard if they try to use it over PoE. It's just not good cable. Don't get copper clad aluminum. That's the CCA cable. Crap stuff. And like I said, now I've got the camera back by the server and facing forward, and these are your standard 2-foot by 4-foot ceiling tiles. They're very popular in a lot of offices, and sometimes you'll see square ones, sometimes you'll see these your standard drop ceiling, and these are for access for ventilation, ducting, and of course this is where a lot of the cabling goes. Now you can just simply count them. That's one of the easiest ways when you go into a building. We'll just look up and do a walk, count the ceiling tiles, and when you're measuring a cable, you got to figure out, okay, how far up the ceiling. We have a particularly kind of a lower ceiling here, but you got to think about, okay, the up and then back down distance, which, okay, let's say 8 feet in this case, 8-foot high ceilings. So we get 8 foot up and down. It's going to come down close to the floor of the wall. So there's 8 feet of cable plus the distance from here to wherever it is. And you're not necessarily going to go directly down this hallway. You may not, depending on what obstructions on the walls. Most of the ceilings in a standard construction like this are going to have hollow walls, and they only go just a little bit above the ceiling tiles because they start out as, empty. When you build the strip mall, they started empty, build it like this. So there's not generally anything up and over, but bring a step stool with you, take a peek in the ceiling, see if there's anything that's going to obstruct getting it from the demarcation or server room or IDF, MDF in the back to any other locations. And then start planning out your cabling from there. Awesome if they have a schematic of the building. They just don't. Scribble it down on paper so you can start, figuring out where these things go. All right, so now we're at the front of my building. Now, what do we have here? So we measured it out. My building, we're about, counting ceiling tiles, it's going to be about 50 feet from where I'm standing to the MDF, or main distribution frame, where we started in the very back. Once you've started there, you can, okay, now I'm going to have 50-foot runs. That means every time I run the cable up to the front here, there's going to be 50 feet of cable used. So you got to kind of keep that in your head. How much cable do I need for the job? And start making some mental notes for the furthest distance. Now, our place here is a little unique because we're a computer store. You may not wire a lot of computer stores. Maybe you're wiring your computer store. We wanted a high density of cables up in this area. Now, we run into this a lot with trucking companies and that we work with because they have dispatch areas or call centers. Whenever they have a call center, the call center may be, and for example, one of them has a call center next to their shipping area because they coordinate there. It's at the very corner of their building. And this is where the MDF, IDF comes in. So main distribution frame at the back where we started. You may go, what's easier is to put a IDF, intermediate distribution frame, over here. Now, what we did in our building is at the front where we have all these jacks. So right here on the wall, there's another one. Behind this computer over here is another spot. Also, all along the front here, there's jack all over the place. This has led to us having this other cabinet put in. Now, they call this cabinet an IDF, or intermediary distribution frame. So instead of running all these, I think there's 33 or 34 drops in here, maybe a few more. I didn't count them exactly. I would if I was actually bidding it. When you put these in, you're like, okay, do you want to run 33 drops all the way to the back and home run them back to the server? That's great, but that's not always the most practical, especially like I mentioned with some of the transportation companies. They're in large warehouses. That means you have to have one pole going from there to here, or sometimes two because you want to bond them together. So here's where speed considerations come in. We are perfectly fine, and actually a majority of companies are, for example, for a call center. Phone calls do not require a massive amount of bandwidth. So one run going from here to there is fine at gigabit, but fiber is a consideration if it comes a greater distance, or running a Cat 6A and getting a switch that supports 10 gigabit is also an option. That way you have a 10 gigabit pipe, because these 33 connections need to get back at the same time to there, and if they squeeze down to the lowest speed, that's where the bottleneck would end up being. But for the most part, when you're talking about a call center with VoIP, honestly, it's perfectly fine to run gigabit. Voice quality is, look up how many kilobits per call. I mean, do some math on this in case they have more phones than you think they will. But generally speaking, voice compresses well. Voice does not take a lot of bandwidth, and getting it across to the back over a gigabit line is generally adequate, because you got to think about all those calls generally leave the building at much less than gigabit. So it's something to think about there. But so once you have the speed consideration figured out, you may want to put one of these in, because when we start putting all these different cables in, now we have a real short runs to do and punch them all here, and it makes the job a whole lot easier, and there's a lot less cabling in the ceiling, and the job actually ends up going a lot faster. So whether or not you need one, make that consideration. But of course, if you need one, then you got to consider the extra cost of adding a cabinet, switches up here, and documentation to it. So you then have to think about, okay, everyone's got to connect here. What if they need VLANs? Well, then you got to make sure that you trunk the ports that go across. And these are just some of the scaling considerations you need to have when you're putting these in. So we did do it in our building. We do it in a lot of the transportation buildings. So it's one of those things to think about, that you don't want to just run everything back across the building. Now the wiring itself, this is where we're talking about being in a strip mall. So fire code here in Michigan, the way it's worded is when you have two adjacent buildings on a strip mall. This is the wall, so the window is right there. This is the wall by which separates me and the other tenants, and of course the other wall, same thing, versus the middle walls that are going to be hollow. They have to put fire stop in here. I imagine this is common throughout a lot of the states. I don't know the rules in there, but this is one of those things that will get you. You're like, oh yeah, I can put wiring drops here on this wall. We put them above because they are for computers, but most of the time you're probably going to want them on the floor, but that's going to vary, or into the cubicles themselves. So when you're doing this, the wall's not hollow there. They put a bar across there, two 2x4s across. That means there's no way to get directly down from here to here without special drill bits. How does that work? It's a pain. You have to get long drill bits and drill through that to get the wire through, because you can't just wall fish it down. So this becomes a real pain in the butt. Now our solution was actually, and that's why there's this corner piece here. This corner piece is just your standard fiber tubing, but we all the Cat 5 cables run down through that orange tube over here. So they come from the ceiling down to get to the back area, and a couple of the other wires that do go through the ceiling for things that we can run through the ceiling up here. But then the bottom down is because we actually had to go down and then this way into the wall. And how do you go that way into the wall when there's studs? Well, we actually cheated, and we ran that same conduit tube underneath here. And when we did that, we then pulled out of the tube and went up to bring the cables up. Sometimes you got to get tricky on them. They're kind of an exception, but I wanted to note that that's something you'll run into in strip malls. The other thing you're going to run into is when people want things in the very front of the building, this becomes really tricky. They're like, oh, I want something under this desk. And you're like, hey, look, a window. How am I supposed to get under the window? You kind of have to do the same thing. You're going to have to come from the side and go underneath to be able to get that. That's not something you're going to be able to just run, unless you're lucky enough, and sometimes you are, because building contractors do this, or when we're doing new construction, we'll put a conduit in and you put a pull string in, and that way after the construction's done you can use the pull string to pull it down. Now what if you have one jack there and someone wants one more jack? That way to cheat is real easy. Pull that jack out, tie a string to it, pull it back out, tie two jacks to it, pull them all back down, and you can pull them down through the same conduit. Hopefully you're not doing any of those. Those are kind of one-off exceptions. They're not part of your regular bidding, but you have to think about that. And if you run into those, you just add extra half-hour labor, how much longer you think it's going to take you to do those. And when we get to the bidding part, we'll talk about those breakdowns there. All right, so I'm at the front of the building, my front lobby, just so you know, and there's a drop. Now the good news is there's a window here, but the drop is on the other side. So it's standard drop ceiling. We came through the ceiling, went down, put a jack on the wall. Pretty straightforward. Now because this is, like I said, this is a mid wall, because now you're looking back at that front counter area. This is a mid wall, which means we're going to be able to get right into the ceiling on it, no problem, and pull the wire straight down through. That's not a big deal at all. So those drops are pretty straightforward to do. There's not much to it. Now a couple tricks to help with where the hell do the wires go. This is one of those things you kind of explain to the client that, hey, they should go in the walls here. They should not go directly under. I can't get it underneath. So you got to explain that, because they may not understand. And then you just tell them, so when it comes to the day of the job, please have a post-it note exactly where you want them. This saves you a lot of trouble. It's cool if you want to draw on the walls, put an X on it, however they want to do it. But Post-it notes are easy because that way, in case they put it too far where you can't put it, and you just say, hey, can I move this Post-it note over? This is where it'll go. You write down the number of drops that go to that location, 2 in this particular instance, even though there's 1 cable plugged in, we did run 2. And then you just tell them, write the number 2 and get a Post-it note on there. Bring some Post-it notes with you. Hand them to the client, because just in that off chance that they're in office without Post-it notes, that makes a big difference. This helps you so much. That way, the day the cabling job comes in, you know where everything is, it's marked. Now, cool if they have a schematic and you can actually draw it all in the schematic, but the schematic is still going to miss how high each one needs to go unless you make that note on there. Actually, now my light turned off. Auto lights. So when you're doing that, those Post-it notes help a lot. That way, you and the client know where everything goes. And I even go a step further. A lot of times when my guys are out on jobs, I have them taking photos before they actually start cutting holes if we think the client's really picky. We worked with a building contractor who we get along with great. We just know how picky they are with everything, which is fine, and we always comply with that. Okay, so you did the walkthrough, you know where the wiring's going to go, you got the physical part figured out. You found out how much wire you're going to run, you figured, okay, this customer wants, and we're using my building as an example here, you know, about 50 drops, let's say, and we know that if we ran them all to the back, you know, it would cost us 50 times 50 in cable, 50 feet lengths of cable, but we're actually running them up front, so there's a little bit less cabling. You can sit and do all the math on that. I'm not going to break that down for you in detail, but kind of get the idea. Those are different things, so you want to know how much, you know, cable to purchase and make the decision on that. When I'm using Invoice Ninja, I've talked about this before, so I'm going to walk you through the process, actually how we do it in our system and how we send the bid to the client now. Here's our client McTest face, which you've used before, and we're going to click on data drop, and I'll show you what we have here. Now, install data drops, we have it here, and I just edit it as needed. So it's wall fish tested plated. That means from the wall plate all the way back to wherever the, you know, if it's the IDF, MDF, wherever that patch panel is, it means all the way back tested and plugged in and working. And I've showed tools on here. I've got like the Klein tester we use to make sure the cable's working fine, make sure it's all good. And that is how we break down the pricing. Now, I like to keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler. And what I mean by that is some people like to break down each individual wall plate. They like to break down every little piece of it. I've seen people break down even what they refer to as like the mud ring, and you can look up some of this like for the actual physical install part. They break it all down and they line item all of it. And I've had people say, oh no, this is how we make our money. You know, we mark up this, mark up that. The reality is you're making it complicated because now you have to adjust if the customer starts with, and we said 51 drops here at an established rate of 180, you then have to go and adjust all of those to quantity of 51. Keeping it simple and keeping it all consolidated for the network drop means if the client says, you know what, when you did the bid, but I decided, can I add one more drop? Sure. And they can also themselves look at it. They see it's the unit cost, which that we'll get to in a second, is really easy to just adjust this number. And if they decide to go with less drops or more drops, it becomes really simple. Now, the unit cost, how much you're going to charge per drop completed, is something you kind of have to figure out for the job. So think about the overall cable you're going to use for the job, and especially the labor. That is where the big part is. So even if we did had 50 drops at 50 feet, so if we said 50 times 50 feet, we're using 2,500 feet of cable. You know, of course, there's going to be some slack and some little bit of waste here and there. So that's about 3,000 foot boxes of cable. Well, cable's not that expensive. Matter of fact, you're looking at $9,000 for this project at 180 a drop, but your boxes of cable are, for nice Cat 6 cable, is going to be roughly, I don't know, $130 a box. It's not most of the cost here. The big thing you have to think about when you're adjusting your unit cost is the labor, because installing the drops, the wall plates, they're cheap. Wall plates are a couple dollars at most. Generally, when you're buying a bulk pack of wall plates, they're under $1 for the wall plate. The little rings and little job boxes that attach to them, same thing, really cheap. You're talking about a few dollars going into the drop. And cable-wise, you're only using a few dollars with the cable. The rest of it is going to be the time you have to put into, like I talked about, the plate at the top of the wall, the board, the runner board across the top. You're going to have to drill through that and pull the wires through. Now, this unit cost also varies greatly depending on location. We here in Michigan, in the Detroit area, this is a general going rate we see, but sometimes we've seen it go a little bit lower. We've seen some people trying to charge way less, which doesn't make any sense to me because I don't think they value the time. And we've seen in other states they charge way more. This is because some states, as I understand, and when we go out of the country, it goes this problem persists where they need special licenses to do it. So the cost can be a lot higher because you have to pay your techs more because of the cost of living in the area, or you have to pay more because you have to keep up with certifications and licensing. So don't look at this price and go, that's what I'm going to charge and that's what I'm going to do to make money. If you're in California, I can tell you that you're not charging enough. If you're in a rural area, you may have to just bump for drive time because sometimes you drive more, and some people like to roll that into the unit cost. That's up to you. I like to line item if there's drive time in there. The other thing this does is it's a quantity game, and you can come up with this for the client. So, hey, if you're looking at a project two ways, you can say, well, if you're only going to go with the 10 drop project, I'm going to charge you $190. But if you go with the 50 drop project, I'll charge you $170. And you can put these things together and adjust it accordingly. Now, everything is a drop when it comes to the wall. So if there's a 4-gang plate, that's not one drop, that's 4 drops. And make sure when you're doing the bids, you're telling that to the client, because sometimes there's confusion. They say, I want 3 workstations, and they told you each workstation needs a phone line and a data line. No problem, because they don't want to do the pass-through the phone. No problem, we can do that. But that means each station needs 2 drops. And make sure you tell at the point when you're bidding it, because there's been confusion where you send the bid over, or like you send it for double the quantity of what we wanted, and we're like, no, we did what you wanted. So always make sure that you're clear that each one's a drop, and that's how you bill it. Now, granted, this is where you can also offer a little bit of discount, because once you've drilled the hole once and you're pulling 4 cables down to the same wall fish, well, you can, if there's a bunch of them like that, you play the laws of averages here and discount the rate. It's up to you, but this becomes complicated. It's just generally not how we do it. We've not had a problem. We've done some of these larger 300, 400 drop jobs and done it exactly like this, where we just put it in without doing like, okay, when it's a 4-gang plate, it's this rate, but it's a 1-gang plate, it's this rate. That makes it complicated for the client. So generally speaking, come up with a unit cost for this particular job. And also let them know, because we've had times when we installed a lot of drops for a client, and then they changed their mind and only want us to run drop, and they want the 1 drop price. No, by the time I come out there running 1 drop for this lower rate, I'm going to have to add some time to come out there. So those are some of the factors that go into there. And you check around. You can find out what people are charging and kind of see what your market is for that. And don't just go undercutting the other people. There's probably a reason they have that price based on there. There's a lot of things you need to have. I carry liability insurance. Obviously, the cost of client acquisition has to be factored in there. You know, how much we spend on marketing, how much time we spend going to events to even get some of these jobs, and networking events and everything else. So you have to think about all that has to go in here. It's not just what you pay the technician. It's everything that leads up to this is how you set any of your rates for things you charge. So, but keeping it this simple makes it real easy. And this is all we put on the line items here. And now you can see we've got an $8,500 job out of 50 drops at $170 a drop. Next piece is we talked about this right here. So we have this 9U rack, and we showed the rack up there, so this has to be put in there. Where do you find these? Well, they're pretty cheap on Amazon. We've actually had, and I did a video about this recently, where we talked about how much better of a deal frequently we find on Amazon with things than we find with some of the other places. So here's a Nave Point 9U deluxe cabinet, 19-inch deep, and there we go. And we don't always, it depends how picky the client is, Nave Point Deluxe IT wall mount cabinet rack, or you can just call it IT won't call nut rack 19 enclosure. Keep it simple. Client knows what it is. It's the wall mount enclosure that you quoted to put on there. So put the description in there. Now, here's the next question. How much do we mark it up? General rule I have is maybe 20% markup on this. So add a few dollars to this. Then you have to add the time it's going to take you to assemble and mount it. This doesn't ship assembled. Think about that. Someone's got to put it together. We know these things really well, so we know how to put them together. It doesn't take us much time, so you can't base it on the first time you put it together. Kind of get an average and idea. My staff can put one of these together in maybe 15, 20 minutes and then mount it on the wall. We actually prefer to do all the assembly parts in the office and bring them delivered unless something's prohibiting us from doing that. That way, if there's any little problems, we found them all here if there was a screw missing. Hasn't happened, but just in case, it's less embarrassing to find a screw missing at a client compared to just, oh, look, we just needed to have one more screw. So you get this, and then you got to mount it on the wall. Make sure you mount it properly. If you're wiring cabling, please know how to do that. Find the studs, bolt it in there. So you got to add an hour. So we started at a unit cost of $149. Let's say we add $35-$40 to that. Now, I don't recommend marking things up too much because this is where clients get often angry. I've seen people do discounted labor when they break everything down and then quadruple all the parts. Guess what someone's going to do? And they're going to copy that and they're going to paste it. And they're going to, hey, look, Tom reviewed one of these, by the way, right here. They found the first result is Amazon. They're going to know how much you paid for it. Do clients do that? Yeah. That happens. People get curious about that. So I never try to put much markup on the parts. That's not where I try to make my money. We've always tried to be very forthcoming. We make it on labor. I'll tell them that if they ask me. We're all in here to business make money. So we, for the trouble of ordering it, we'll say, we'll mark this up to, $169. So add $20 to it. Add another hour of labor in whatever your labor rate is. So it starts at $149. Add, we'll put $25 for an example. And then we'll add an hour of labor, which we charge $120 an hour. So $294 becomes the installed price. And then what we're doing here, and this is just something Invoice Ninja does. We put the 3 pounds. Assemble mount cabinet. All right, typos. Sorry. And when the pound signs do, when they show you down here as it's building the quote, see how it just puts a little gray under here. So when you're detailing it out, we have that information in there. So great. There's parts. What's the other parts we need? Now, I could break these down in different. We generally just list them as the parts because we put the description in here. Actually, I might have the 48. Yeah, we have the gigabit switches in here and stuff like that. If there's any switches, network 48 port switch. This all depends on how you set up your system. I'm just going to list under parts because I don't have an item for this. But 48 port patch panel, same thing. Go to Amazon. How much is that? Patch panel, here's a network distribution, Cat 6 48. They're $50. Put a few dollar markup on there. There's not really an extra on that. So, we'll put this at $65. Couple dollar markup, quantity one, and away we go. Now we have the total here for $8,069. You've made it very simple for the client. The only thing that you may have to warn a client about is we knew some were going to go in this front IDF, some are going in the back. So 50 does exceed 48, but some are going to the back. And you could always relist your data drops and put data drops to the back IDF, data drops to the front. That's not a big deal to split that so we know where they're going. And you can also have to let the client know that, and this happened recently with one of our clients, we told them, look, they wanted 42 drops. So 48 port patch panel, no problem. We get there, they decided that they wanted 10 more. Well, we suggested that they get a bigger patch panel, and my guys keep one in the truck. They kept a 24 in the truck, so we had to add another patch panel on their parts list. So they're cheap. We keep a handful of these in stock at any given time. So there's something you should have, but it's also something you have to adjust if the client say, hey, if you exceed this, you will need a bigger patch panel. But generally, the clients are just doing this. They're just going here and either changing it to a couple dollars less, a couple dollars more by adjusting the quantity. And that makes it really easy. Like I said, this keeps the simplicity of how you do the bidding with the clients because there's always changes and adjustments. Now we're going to add another one here. We're going to bring this one up because I just like when it looks when it's up. And I put this in a second time because this is another thing we do. Wallfish tested plated. Install network drops for WAP. And this is with your wireless access point. We still have a rate for those and the same thing. And we're just going to change it to wired. Wired tested mounted. And this is for putting in WAPs. So we'll put these in, so your wireless access points, and same thing, you come up with a rate for each WAP. This makes it easy for the client. Now, this is where a lot of times we make it even simpler for them, and let's talk about like a Unify AC. So we'll put in a AC-LR. So we put that in there. So now what we're going to do is, there's the 180 we need to add, and how much is the AC-LR? Look them up real quick. So what are they going for? Now with the Unify stuff, like right here's one of the long range ones, pretty straightforward. I usually go by the MSRP price, which I think is $119. So that's enough markup to me as MSRP. And once again, if you're buying these in quantity, you can get them a little cheaper. But if the customer looks, this is what it is. So there's our little Unify long range. So which one are we using? We'll just go ahead and, there we go, paste that in. So that's 119 plus 180, so that's 300. Now, the client, if they're wavering back and forth about installing these, how many do they want? Well, they may say, 3 is good. But later, before you get there or whatever, maybe they change their mind about the quote and they only want 2 or they want 4. Now you've got an easy way for the client who you give them the prices to put this in. It's really easy for them to go, hey, I can change it now. They don't have to change 2 numbers on an invoice. They can calculate this themselves, and it's really easy to do. So here's the 48-port patch panel. There's the 4 wireless access points, and away we go. Now, if you still have a PoE switch, then it's another piece you'll have to calculate in here, is making sure there's enough ports and enough wattage on a PoE to run this. But you kind of get the idea of keep it very simple so you can communicate with the client. Because the reality is, we as technicians love all the doodads and details that go into this. We are fascinated by all the technology, or at least a lot of us are. I know I am. And that's great. They are looking at this as a tool so their company can operate like anything else. They have a lot of other things. And I come back to some of the transportation clients. They have a lot of stuff to calculate. I'm sure the guy selling them a large truck loves to talk about how many, horsepower and all kinds of cool whiz-bang things that go on inside the engine with it, but they're going, I just need something to haul freight because I am paid to haul freight. Will this thing haul the freight I want? Will this bring the data I want so my customers can answer the phone? So when we call, my staff can do their job. So can we have wireless all throughout our building? And, in the areas that you quoted. And if I need more wireless, how much does that cost? Well, cool. I need one more. Now they know. And right now, we're not talking tech, you're talking business to them. You've created this to a simple template that your customers can easily work with you on and make adjustments to the pricing to get the job done. And you've now eliminated some of that barrier. If you make this convoluted and really long, they start looking for line items and they're like, just get it done. If you make it very easy to go, oh, okay, we wanted a couple more drops. This is just kind of this ethos that we try to keep with our clients and try to really be this way with them. Now, a couple quick notes about purchasing the parts, and a few of you have asked about this, about we purchase things from Amazon. We do work with other vendors besides Amazon, of course, kind of an as needed and who's there, but do not do this. This has come up a couple times with this cabling. Someone says Cat 6 cabling's cheaper than Cat 5, and why do you even do Cat 5? Some clients, when they're really on a budget, will do Cat 5 because gigabit is more than enough just to do the phones, and they're fine with that. Cat 6, if you see it for really cheap, like $56 a box, you're probably looking at CCA cable, copper-clad aluminum. Please run away from this stuff. Stay away from it. You can do your own searching and find out reasons why, but in short, you're talking about copper-clad aluminum. When you do this, you want standard Cat 6 full copper, or, depending on how the code works for you, you need plenum or riser. Now, this does have to factor into your billing. Most cities here in Michigan and the state itself do not have any specialized rules regarding plenum. Plenum is a fire-rated stuff, and we're talking about going into the ceilings, like a drop ceiling. That airspace is the plenum where air may circulate that may come in contact with people. So if there's a fire, it would circulate there. When it's all said and done, this type of job, because we label everything as we go, we don't actually add too many extra notes. But one thing we might add for notes is when we do like 1 and 2 drops is like we just had a job where we installed 2 access points. Well, we just labeled the ports we put them on because we handed off as we were contracted by another IT company. So we'll sometimes put in there and on there, in here, or even in the notes like, hey, installed port 22 and 23 for wireless access points, so they know where to finish plug them in. But that's it. And then we email the quote to them, and it's ready to go. Now, last thing I will talk about, we'll need a deposit of $0 to get started. May not be your process. It depends on the client. Generally speaking, we look at a 50% deposit. So we got $9,800 here. So maybe you want a partial deposit of $4,900. That's kind of an up to you thing. It's how you want to work with the companies. Generally, we like to get any new client, we're going to ask for 50% down to get things started because we're not sure how the engagement's going to go with them. We sometimes ask for more when we're dealing with some of these out-of-state companies because they can be a little bit more of a pain, we've learned. So we ask for a larger deposit, 60 or 70% down, because we're having someone out of state contract us to wire their local building. Well, it's really hard to chase them for money sometimes. So it's a risk you have to take in business, but getting at least a larger deposit helps mitigate some of that risk on there. But then we send it off to them, and let me show you real quick here. So email the quote, and now it says $4,900. This is just a feature that Invoice Ninja has to make this easy. Hitting mark send is kind of the same as emailing it, and this is kind of a cool thing that I like, because this frequently we do this, and it emails them the quote. They see it, then they go, I want to change. They call me or email us back, and can you add this? And we just had this happen the other day. They wanted a few more added. So we'll bring this back up to 52, save quote, and this is something handled really well in our system. So now we just email the same quote again by changing that, and it updates and revises the system for them. It also is kind of cool because it does keep a quote history in here, so we can look at each quote and who edited it. Because sometimes I'm the one that may have created the quote, or maybe one of my other staff created the quote. They contact me, and then we go back and forth. So this is just a couple of those things to think about, and how we do the quotes and how we send them out. And this is the process. This isn't like me making something up and telling you this is kind of like how we do it. This is what a job looks like for us, except for it's usually not to Beavis and Butthead. It's to real customers every day. We do a lot of cabling, a lot of wiring, and this process, people can tell me I'm wrong. I've been doing it for years. We're profitable, and it's not something you need to overthink that much. Do come up with your pricing. You're going to have to adjust it. If my pricing is a basis, you may make a lot of money. You may make very little because the cost of living and everything is so much more expensive where you are, like California, Seattle, New York, some of those places where you just have a lot of other expenses. So you kind of got to look at the big picture. So there's some bigger thought you have to have. But this is running a quote. This is it. Once it's done, it gets approved and money goes in the bank. And that quick, you go through a small office, even as small as ours. Granted, 50 drops is kind of a lot for this big of a building, but when you're building out like a dispatch center, call center areas, there's a lot of drops that go in. These jobs get up there $20,000 easily for a small business, and catching them when they're moving in. Now, I know a lot of people say, how do you get the clients? I've talked about this before. Sales, more sales, meetings, chamber, everything. There's some more information on the channel, more videos coming on some of the sales stuff, but that is a tough part of it. There's not a magical place you could just have business land on you. Maybe one day I'll invent it, but I haven't found it. And if someone knows one, let me know. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and click the thumbs up. Leave us some feedback below to let us know any details, what you like and didn't like as well, because we love hearing the feedback. Or if you just want to say thanks, leave a comment. If you want to be notified of new videos as they come out, go ahead and hit the subscribe and the bell icon. That lets YouTube know that you're interested in notifications. Hopefully they send them, as we've learned with YouTube. Anyways, if you want to contract us for consulting services, you go ahead and hit lawrencesystems.com, and you can reach out to us for all the projects that we can do and help you. We work with a lot of small businesses, IT companies, even some large companies, and you can farm different work out to us or just hire us as a consultant to help design your network. Also, if you want to help the channel in other ways, we have a Patreon. We have affiliate links. You'll find them in the description. You'll also find recommendations to other affiliate links and things you can sign up for on lawrencesystems.com. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.